We're back at RSA Conference 2024 in Broadcast Alley. I'm Jeff Mann, co-host of Paul's Security Weekly, and I'm here right now with John Shier. He's field CTO for threat intelligence at a company called Sophos. John, welcome.
Thank you very much,
We've
Jeff.
made it to the end.
We have. We're almost there. We're not there yet.
We're almost there, but we have a few minutes left.
We sure do.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into cyber.
Yeah, so I'm a field CTO at Sophos, as you say, and I've been at Sophos for 18 years now, so I've been in the cybers for a little while from that standpoint. And before that, kind of went through many of the jobs that some of us do before going on to a vendor. I was working at help desk doing security there. Mm-hmm. I worked for one of our partners at one point, selling security, and then eventually ended up at Sophos.
Wow. And how'd you work your way up the ladder at Sophos?
I started off as an SE.
Okay.
And I enjoyed that for a while, and then I was just looking for different challenges. What I really enjoyed, beyond communicating to our partners and our customers, what our products could do for them to keep them safe and secure, I also enjoyed communicating that to broader audiences, right? So I got more involved with presenting research. I got more involved with doing some media stuff. So out of that grew my then transition into a role like this, where I'm doing primarily research, writing reports on things like incident response cases that we do, and then just trying to basically formulate some idea of what the security landscape looks like, what the threat landscape looks like, putting those together, and then, all right, what are we going to do about it now, right? We got these great products and services. We know what the tools and the bad guys are doing and the techniques they're using. How do we use the tools that we have today to combat it? And then what else do we need to worry about, right?
Sure.
What non-technological things do we potentially need to do in order to prevent threats?
Oh, it's not potentially. It's sort of the missing ingredient.
Yeah.
It's fairly unusual that somebody's at a company 18 years in this industry. I'm guessing it's because you believe in what Sophos is doing.
Yeah, I've believed in the products and the mission for quite some time, and what's really nice about our company is that we do keep innovating, we do keep pushing the boundaries wherever we can, wherever possible. And we've always had a singular focus on just stopping bad things, right? Protecting our customers. And I think that's just a really good mindset to have as you're going through and trying to develop new products and trying to get into different markets. Is the core value is always, we need to protect our customers, and we need to make it easy for them to be protected using our products.
I mean, heck, and how long has Sophos been around?
We're 40 years-ish. 2025 will be 40 years. So, we've been around for a long time, and we've seen a lot of evolution in the industry itself, in the types of products we're using, the types of technologies we're using, right? We're always looking for new ways to stay ahead of the threat, minimize the risk, and that just keeps it nice and interesting and fun.
Yeah, I would love to dig deeper. I've been in the industry a long time and started with the government, so I remember kind of vaguely when Sophos came about, but also especially when the internet became the big thing and internet security, and back when the vendor hall of RFSA, if there had been one like in the early 90s, there would have been two companies over there, a firewall and a vulnerability scanner type of thing.
I think it's my 16th RSA or something like that, so it's changed a lot.
I put together a talk that I'm doing this year at some conferences and kind of going through that history and that time frame and just remembering companies popped up back then, 12 to 18 months they were getting snatched up by the big players, the big IT companies, and we don't have to talk about it now, but I want to go back and do the research. Sophos was sort of before that era, and maybe that helped push through, because it's kind of unusual that a company exists this long without having been morphed and reimagined and acquired and all that kind of stuff.
It's also interesting to think that back so I've been at Sophos 18 years, but in security specifically, probably like 25-ish years, right? And to think back to the earlier parts of my career where you could be an expert in security writ large.
Right.
There's no such thing anymore. Now, you can be an expert in like specific Kubernetes authentication, mechanisms and know nothing else about security and do really well there, right? It's amazing just the breadth that the industry has expanded into.
But that's part of the problem,
It
because
is.
fewer and fewer organizations or vendors that are selling solutions sort of seem to have the ability to understand, take a step back and try to figure out what it is you're trying to solve, what it is you're trying to protect, what it is you're trying to accomplish, whether it's your clients, whether it's your executives, your intellectual property, your research data, whatever it is. And of course, in this day and age, and over the last couple of days, there's the usual theme for the RSA conference, but Sophos, you've been doing something for the last couple of years in terms of giving back information to try to help companies. So I believe it's the fifth.
Yeah, the fifth. This particular report, the State of Ransomware report, is our fifth one, where we do an independent survey of 5,000 companies in 14 different countries, and just we're trying to do two things, right? You say we're giving back, absolutely. What we're trying to do with that report and some of the other research that we do is we're trying to arm people with information so that they can then make good decisions. Informed decisions. Risk, managing risk decisions, right?
I call that giving back.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
It also helps with sales.
But it also helps us understand.
Yeah,
it helps us understand what's happening as well, because I find that sometimes when you're in vendor land, and specifically in the research side of things, you can be a little bit myopic of the things that you see, and it's understanding on the other side how these things impact the end user, the end organizations. If there's any nuance there, it's difficult to pick up sometimes. So it's having these surveys and doing this research, I think, gives everybody a little bit of a extra information to make those risk-based decisions that we need to make.
I feel like, given the topic of the report, I should ask, what are the lowlights of the report this year?
Yeah, so there's definitely some lowlights and some highlights. So I'll give you the bad news first, and we can get on some of the good news. So the bad news is that year on year, we found that there was a 5x increase in median payments. So the amount that people were paying to ransomware criminals has gone up. We also found that things like recovery time are also increasing, right? And I think as some of these attacks are getting more complex, they're requiring more expertise and more complex recovery. Right. We also actually, talking about payments, we also for the first time asked about demands, because we wanted to sort of split that up, and we hear about the payments all the time, but how much do they actually ask for? Because sometimes that can be a signal in and of itself of how the criminals are thinking about the market and how they're trying to find those price points, right? So
the irony is they're a business now too.
Well, exactly, and so 2/3 of all these demands were over $1 million.
Right.
We also found that greater than 90% of all the ransomware attacks, of which part of the good news is we saw that declining. So it's a bit of good news, and I'll touch on that again in a second, but the successful ransomware attacks were also going after backups. So they're trying to compromise backups as well as stealing data, which is something that we've heard for a little while now, where it's this double extortion, and some of them are doing exclusively that.
Right.
And then finally, a piece of good news was that globally 97% of the companies that were attacked were engaged in law enforcement. And it's 98% in the US specifically. So that in of is important, because it helps us understand the scale and scope of the problem, and then it helps us fund the solutions to dealing with this.
And I don't know that anybody's come up with the solution for solving the ransomware problem, and it almost reminds me of the old cat and mouse game of the Cold War, which I'm old enough to remember, where one side would do something devastating, the other would figure it out, and then they would do something devastating in terms of making an impact to tilt the scale. But so ransomware, it's not as simple as making sure all your systems are patched. It's not as simple as making sure all your employees know not to click on the fish. It's not as simple as backups. Is there opinion question, is the best thing that's going on right now involving law enforcement, so that the threat actors have to do their own risk analysis, and perhaps there's a greater risk of getting caught? Or is that still a little bit down the road?
It's part of it. right? Because I don't think, as with security, we always say it's complicated, right?
Sure.
Whenever people ask us a question about like,
Yep.
they want a clear-cut answer, but very often there's nuance, there's context.
Sure.
And on the defense side, on the how do we deal with this problem, law enforcement is a portion of the response to how we deal with this.
Right.
We need law enforcement to, wherever possible, apprehend, prosecute, and lock these criminals away.
Right.
But what they're also doing at the same time, because I don't think they're going to get there completely. There are too many of these criminals that are in non-extradition countries, and we're just never going to get them, and they can respin up a business under a different banner tomorrow, right? But what it does is it breaks that sort of circle of trust that a lot of these criminals operate under. If they're constantly thinking that, oh, the FBI might be in our infrastructure or might be inside our affiliate program, and that trust gets eroded, I think it slows them down a little bit. It gets them off balance enough that we can do some of the other things that are required, both from the public and the private sector side, to, again, try to deal with this problem as best we can.
So, what other more highlights, good things, positive things can organizations take from the report?
Yeah, so speaking of the backup compromise, right? So over 90% attackers went after the backups. In greater than half of those, they were successful. And so I'll frame the negative, but add the positive at the end, which is the negative is that if your backups are compromised during a ransomware attack, and let's just peel back for just a second, right? There's broadly two ways you recover from a ransomware attack, is you've got comprehensive backups, or you somehow get the decryption key and decrypt your data, right? So if now the backups are compromised, your options go, well, 50% of your options go away. So what we found is for those that had backups compromised, we saw that the payments doubled. The victims were twice as likely to pay. But concerningly, the recovery costs went up 8 times. So the positive that we can maybe spin out of that is to say, all right, well, if today you're an organization that doesn't have backups, which still some do, or you have backups that are easily accessible by cyber criminals, there are things you can do today to make that less of a risk to your organization if you do get hit by a ransomware attack. So look at what you have today. If you don't have backups, start taking some backups.
Figure it out.
If they're online, if they're accessible, well then look at how you can maybe get the old 3-2-1, right? Three backups, 2 different media, one of them offline kind of thing. Like adhere to that principle, and knowing that the cyber criminals are going after them and it's going to cost you more in the end should be enough, I think, for the ones that aren't doing enough to start doing that.
Well, I've been around long enough to know that probably a lot of companies are like, well, it hasn't happened yet. We'll deal with it when the time comes, and then time comes, that's when they get religion and start doing stuff. Hopefully, there's enough stories like that out there these days that more companies are trying to do something. But then there's the problem of it's always it's another cost, and how much is enough, and where do they put their scarce resources and dollars to the best impact?
That scarce resources is definitely something, especially in the SMB. Right. There are more businesses that are small, medium businesses worldwide than large enterprise, and the cyber criminals don't care who they go after. There is some targeting, but it's very minimal, and it's mostly opportunistic, and they don't really know who they've attacked until they've attacked them, and then it's spend a little minute looking around the servers and seeing, looking at the domain name and going, okay, who we got
business.
Here?
It's nothing
just
personal.
Business, right? And the thing that you can do once you have some of these, risk mitigation technologies in play is draft up some response plans, practice them, because the backup that you don't have is the one that you're going to regret the most. The second thing you're going to regret the most is having a backup that doesn't work. Right?
Well, our time unfortunately has run out, but I want to thank you for sharing what's going on, providing the information as Sophos, and having a conversation that's actually about something that's really impacting and not some of the hyperbole that's been going around this week. That's going to wrap us for this session. If you want to learn more about Sophos, download the report. You can get there by going to securityweekly.com/Sophos RSAC. And this is our last interview this week at RSA. I want to thank you guys for tuning in all this week. Hope you enjoy the content and the conversations we've had. To find this when they go online, go to securityweekly.com/RSAC. See you next year.